There will be 3 lectures on Chapter 2, and this is the first of those 3. My lecture follows the material in Miguel Roig-Francolí's book, Harmony in Context. Tonic and dominant harmony are the 2 most important chords in tonal music. Both tonic and dominant are structural harmonies, meaning that they can serve as ending points for phrases or sections of music, although only tonic is likely to be the end of an entire piece. And also they can be embellished or prolonged by other chords, which are then perceived as being less important than the prolonged tonic or prolonged dominant harmony. Chapter 2 gives a couple of examples of sections of music that consist only of tonic and dominant harmonies. In classical music, it wouldn't really be possible except by using 1 and 5 to restrict music to just 2 chords. So really the only way that you can write a 2-chord piece of classical music is by using the 5 chord and the 1 chord. I'm going to start by playing Anthology number 52 for you. Anthology number 52 is an aria by Giuseppe Verdi from the opera La Traviata. And this piece is in B-flat major. So if you think about it, B-flat major is the tonic, and what's the dominant? Yes, you are right, I hope. The dominant is F major. And as we go through this piece, you can see which chord, the 1 chord B flat or the 5 chord F, is being used by looking at the bass line and seeing what note is on the downbeat of the bass line. Now, this music goes pretty fast, and there's just 1 chord per measure. When we get to a measure like this one, measure 30, you can see that there's this kind of pa-pa or boom-chick-chick texture. This is what you learned about in an earlier chapter as being a bass afterbeat technique. The idea here is that the bass note F on the downbeat is the bass note for the whole measure. So if you were analyzing this, you would not say that there was a 5 chord on the downbeat and then a 5-6-5, that is a first inversion 5-7 chord, for the last 2/3 of the measure. The whole thing is a 5-7 chord. So that's a very simple piece using just the 1 and the 5 chord. Here's another piece. This is example 2.1 from the textbook. This is part of a very simple piano sonata in D major by Beethoven. Because it's in D major, the 1 chord is D major, and the dominant chord of D major is, think about it, what is the 5 chord in D major? Yes, it is A major. So as you follow along with this music, you can look at the bass line, and when you have a D on the downbeat, this is a 1 chord, and when you have an A on the downbeat, what you have is a 5-7 chord. It's a 5-7 chord because there's a G that's part of the chord. Much of the right-hand part is also arpeggiating the chord, but take a look at measures 3 and 4. Here the notes that are circled are part of the harmony. So the circled notes are G, E, C sharp, A, G, E, C sharp. Those are notes of the A major minor 7th chord. These other notes, the F sharp, the D, and the B, these are non-chord tones. They are all passing tones because they're connecting notes that are different from each other. They're part of a continuous descending motion. So the F connects the G with the E, and so on. Notice again that there's one of these bass figuration patterns. It is not correct in a measure like measure 1 to analyze every single 8th note. The chord progression does not go 1, 1, 6, 4, 1, 6, 1, 6, 4, 1, 1, 6, 4. It's all a root position 1 chord. The D that we have on the downbeat is the bass note for the entire measure. And we could think of the F sharp as being kind of a tenor note and the A as being kind of an alto note, with the soprano being the right-hand melody. Let's listen to this example with just 1 and 5-7. This is a piece by Kunau, and I apologize that the image is a little bit blurry. I think I didn't scan it at quite the right number of dots per inch. This is a piece that's in C major, and it's a rather lengthy segment. It's 33 measures long, and throughout the piece it uses only C major and G major chords. Studying this piece will help us understand some of the possible functions of these two harmonies. I'm going to play the piece for you at the piano. I don't guarantee that there will be no mistakes, but I'll do my best. Okay, so let's talk about the different functions of tonic and dominant harmony in this piece. First of all, I'll start with tonic harmony. I have 3 points to make about the function of tonic harmony in this piece. First of all, the tonic is a starting point for the progression. Most tonal music starts with tonic harmony because it's extremely stable and it's the chord around which all the other harmonies resolve. It would be unusual, although certainly not unheard of, for a classical piece to start off tonic on some chord other than tonic. Second point, the tonic can be prolonged or extended over a lengthy stretch of music. Here in the first 14 measures, so like all of the first system and then most of the second system, tonic is prolonged by repetition and by arpeggiation in the left hand and then in the right hand. It would also be possible to prolong tonic harmony through the use of other chords, using those chords as passing or neighboring chords, including the dominant. The dominant could be used within an extended tonic harmony as a passing or neighboring chord, but that doesn't happen here. Third, the tonic chord appears at the final cadence of this piece. The chord progression here at the end, 5-1, is called an authentic cadence. What you have with an authentic cadence is a dominant or dominant function chord going to a tonic. We'll talk a little more about this in the third lecture. The 5 chord before the final tonic creates tension because of the leading tone that it has in it. That would be the B that's here, sort of in the alto voice. The leading tone, of course, is a tendency tone that pulls strongly toward the tonic. The 5 chord also includes the second scale degree, re, that would be the D in the top voice, and this note also pulls toward tonic, although less strongly. The tension is resolved when the 5 chord resolves to the 1 chord at the end. And that word resolve is important. We use it to talk about the motion from tension to release. Now let's talk about the different functions of dominant harmony in the piece. At the end of the first section of the piece, after a long period of prolonging tonic, the 5 chord is used to close out the section. This cadence, which ends on a root position 5 chord, is called a half cadence. A half cadence is an inconclusive ending that nevertheless is perceived as a kind of a halfway ending, kind of like if you had a sentence that says, "Because my cat was ill, I got some medicine from the vet." Because my cat was ill there might be a comma there, can't stand alone as a sentence. We wait after "because my cat was ill" to hear what the rest of the sentence is. And then the second part of the sentence, "I went to the vet and got some medicine," is kind of like the authentic cadence that we have here. That part ends with a period, which is conclusive. The second use of the 5 chord we already talked about. The 5 chord is part of this authentic cadence at the end. It precedes 1, and the final resolution from 5 to 1 is what makes the piece seem like it has ended. Thirdly, the 5 chord can also, like tonic, be prolonged or extended over a lengthy stretch of music. And this happens starting in measure 17, going all the way through measure 27. Prolonging 5 like this builds suspense and creates tension. I don't know if you heard it, but when I finally arrived at measure 18, that tension was resolved by moving us from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. As in the tonic prolongation of the first half of the piece, dominant is prolonged here by repetition and by arpeggiation. Arpeggiation first in the left hand and then in the right hand. Again, it would also be possible to prolong dominant harmony through the use of other chords as passing or neighboring chords, including the use of the tonic chord in that way, but that doesn't happen in this piece. Before I end my lecture, I want to talk a little bit about passing and neighboring tones. These were introduced in chapter F, and I want to quickly review them and also mention a new type of non-chord tone, which is the incomplete neighbor. Let's look at measures 28 through 31 of the piece. The harmony is C major, and so when we're looking at notes that are not C, E, and G, by definition, these are non-chord tones because they are not part of the 1 chord. There are a couple of examples of neighbor tones here. Neighbor tones or neighbor notes, also called neighboring tones, can be either upper neighbors or lower neighbors. A neighbor tone connects by step 2 notes that are the same. So here in measure 28, the F connects the E before it with the E that's after it. And the D connects the C that's before it with the C that's after it. So we would say that these are upper neighbor tones. Over here in measure 30, the D and the B are lower neighbor tones, connecting the E with the E and the C with the C. We also have a number of passing tones here. All of these chords that I've labeled with a P are passing tones. The Fs always connect an E going to a G or a G going down to an E. And the Ds always connect an E going down to a C or a C going up to an E. So here's what those passing tones sound like. And finally, the F is an incomplete neighbor note. If the F were to go down to an E, it would then have an E before it and an E after it. So it would be like this that we had over here in measure 28. But this is an incomplete neighbor because it's a neighbor only on one side. It's a neighbor to the E, but it's not a neighbor to the D because there's a bigger skip there. An incomplete neighbor can also be a neighbor to the note that follows it. We'll see an example of an incomplete neighbor later that precedes a note that it's a neighbor to, but it's not a neighbor to the chord that comes before it. In the second lecture, I'll talk more specifically about the part writing that involves the 1 and the 5 chord, and more generally, that can be used with chords whose roots are a perfect 5th or a perfect 4th apart.